The last sound my husband made was a sigh. A soft, final exhalation that seemed to carry all 42 years of our life with it, leaving the world, and me, in a sudden, profound silence. The first sound I heard from my son, David, just a few days after the funeral, was the cloying, condescending click of his tongue. "Now, Mom," he began, and in those 2 words, I felt the entire landscape of my future shift, grinding like tectonic plates into a shape I did not recognize. He thought the silence Richard left behind was empty space. He was about to find out it was a fortress. This is a story about being underestimated. It's for anyone who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, or irrelevant, especially by those who are supposed to love you most. If you believe that a person's worth isn't defined by their age, and that justice, sometimes, is best served cold, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, and subscribe to this channel. You're going to want to hear how a quiet, grieving widow reminded her son that even the gentlest-looking lions still have claws. Part 1, The Gathering Storm. Grief is a strange and disorienting country. In the first few weeks after Richard passed, I felt like an unwilling tourist there, wandering through a fog so thick it muffled every sound and dulled every color. My home, the one Richard and I had built not with timber and nails but with laughter, arguments, and decades of shared mornings, suddenly felt like a museum of a life I used to live. Every object held an echo. The worn spot on the arm of his favorite chair, the faint scent of pipe tobacco still clinging to the curtains in his study, the chipped coffee mug with the faded picture of a lighthouse that he refused to throw away. These weren't just things, they were artifacts of our love, and without him, they seemed to mock me with their permanence. David, our only child, saw things differently. He didn't see a home, he saw an asset. He didn't see a grieving mother, he saw a problem to be managed. He arrived the Tuesday after the funeral, not with a casserole or a comforting hug, but with a leather-bound folio and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His wife, Linda, trailed behind him, her gaze sweeping over our furniture with the calculating precision of an auctioneer. She clutched a ridiculously expensive handbag to her chest like a shield, her perfume, sharp and synthetic, an unwelcome invasion in a house that still smelled of Richard. "Mom," David said, seating himself at the kitchen table where he'd once done his homework, a place I had served him 1,000 meals. He didn't ask to sit. He presided. "Linda and I have been talking. And we're worried about you here. All alone in this big place." Linda chimed in, her voice a syrupy confection of false concern. "It's just too much for one person, Evelyn. The upkeep, the stairs, you have to be realistic." I looked at my hands, resting on the worn oak of the table. I could still see the faint scar on my thumb from when I'd sliced it cutting apples for a pie for David's 10th birthday. Richard had bandaged it for me right here in this kitchen. Realistic? I thought. What is more real than this? I simply stirred my tea, the clink of the spoon against the porcelain a small, defiant sound in the heavy silence. "I'm fine, David. This is my home." He sighed, a theatrical, put-upon sound he'd perfected in his teenage years. "That's just the grief talking, Mom. You're not thinking clearly. This house is a burden. Property taxes, the roof needs work, the plumbing is ancient. It's a money pit. We need to get you somewhere more practical." He kept using that word. As if my life was a joint venture, a corporate decision to be made in a boardroom he had just appointed himself chairman of. Over the next few days, that "we" became a battering ram. "We think you should start packing up the guest room. We have a friend in real estate who can give us a free appraisal. We found a lovely retirement community just 20 minutes from our house." They spoke of my life in the past tense. They talked about me as if I wasn't in the room, my desires and opinions nothing more than inconvenient background noise. Linda started pointing at things, my mother's antique vanity, Richard's collection of model ships. "That will have to go," she'd murmur to David. "Far too cluttered for a modern apartment." Each word was a small, sharp cut. I felt myself shrinking, becoming a ghost in my own life. The fog of grief was being replaced by a suffocating smog of powerlessness. I'd lie awake at night in the bed I'd shared with Richard for over 4 decades, the space beside me a cold, vast emptiness, and I'd listen to the house settle. It was a language I understood. The groan of the floorboards, the rattle of a windowpane in the wind. The house was grieving, too. And my son wanted to tear it down. The breaking point, the moment the hairline crack in my heart split wide open, came about a month after Richard was gone. I was in his study, a room I'd mostly avoided. It still felt too much like him. I was looking for an old photo album, wanting, for a moment, to retreat into the past, into a time when my family felt whole. His old, scuffed leather briefcase was tucked away in the bottom of his closet. I hadn't seen him use it in years, not since he'd retired from his accounting firm. My fingers trembled as I touched the worn brass latches. They clicked open with a sound that echoed in the silent room. Inside, nestled among some old tax documents and a half-finished crossword puzzle, was a thick manila envelope. My name was written on the front in Richard's familiar, steady hand. Evelyn. Just my name. My heart began to pound, a frantic, hopeful drumbeat against my ribs. I sat on the floor, the scent of old paper and leather filling my senses, and I carefully tore it open. Inside were 3 things. A letter, a folded property deed, and a bank statement. My hands shook so much I could barely read the letter. His words, his voice, seemed to rise from the page, a message from a world away. My dearest Evelyn, it began that if you are reading this, it means I've gone on ahead. Don't you dare be sad for too long. We had a wonderful run, you and I, 42 years. I wouldn't have traded a single day. But I've worried, Ev. I've worried about what comes next for you. I know our son. I love him, but I am not blind to his nature. He is impatient. He sees problems to be solved, not people to be cherished. He will try to manage you, to make decisions for you, all under the guise of what's best. Do not let him. Your life is your own. It always has been. Years ago, I started putting a little money aside. A bonus here, a successful investment there. I wanted you to have something that was yours and yours alone. A nest egg that no one else knew about. I used it to buy that little cottage we always admired out in Rosewood, the one by the creek with the big oak tree in the back. We dreamed of retiring there, remember? I put it solely in your name, my love. It has been yours, legally, for over 5 years. The deed is in this envelope. There's also an account at the Rosewood Community Bank. A statement is in here as well. There is $480,000 in it. Also yours alone. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. It's enough for peace. It's enough for freedom. Use them as you wish, Evelyn. Live quietly or have an adventure. But live for yourself. Never, ever let anyone else hold the pen that writes the story of your life. Not even our son. All my love, forever, Richard. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. They weren't just tears of grief anymore. They were tears of overwhelming love, of profound gratitude. He had seen it. He had known, all along, the kind of man David had become. And from beyond the grave, he had reached out and handed me a shield. No, not a shield. A sword. I unfolded the deed. The property address in Rosewood. My name, Evelyn Marie Thompson, printed in stark, official black ink. Then, the bank statement. The account number, my name, and a balance that made me gasp, $480,217.34. That night, I didn't just cry. I wept. I wept for the man I had lost, for the son I was losing, and for the woman I had forgotten I was, a woman who was not a burden, not a problem, but a person with her own strength and her own future. When the tears finally subsided, in the cold, pre-dawn light, something else had taken their place. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was sharper than grief, colder than sorrow. It was resolve. A quiet, unyielding, diamond-hard resolve. David and Linda came over the next weekend. They didn't call first. They used the key David had taken from my purse at the hospital, the one he claimed he was holding onto for safekeeping. They walked in with a woman I didn't know, a severe-looking blonde in a sharp blazer with a plastic smile and a clipboard. "Mom," David called out, his voice booming with false cheer. "This is Brenda, from Prime Real Estate. She's the best in the business. She's just going to have a quick look around, get an idea of the market value." Brenda's eyes darted around my living room, not seeing a life, but calculating square footage and resale potential. "Charming period details," she said, her voice devoid of any actual charm. "We'll have to stage it, of course. Get rid of all this clutter." She was pointing at my bookshelf, at the leather-bound classics Richard had collected since he was a boy. I stood there, frozen, my heart a block of ice in my chest. The violation was so profound, so breathtakingly arrogant, that I couldn't speak. They were walking through my home, my life, with a stranger, divvying up my future without even the courtesy of asking my permission. David saw the look on my face and misinterpreted it as confusion. He put an arm around my shoulder, a heavy, proprietary weight. "Don't you worry your little head about a thing, Mom. Brenda and I will handle everything. We'll have this place sold in no time, and you'll be settled into a nice, clean apartment before you know it. It's for the best." I looked from my son's patronizing face to the predatory smile of the real estate agent. I saw Linda in the dining room, mentally measuring the walls for her own furniture. In that moment, they sealed their fate. They thought they were planning my future. They had no idea I was already planning theirs. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, a slight, slow inclination of my head. I let them believe they had one. I let them think I was a frail, forgetful old woman, too lost in her grief to fight back. Their condescension had just become my greatest camouflage. And as they walked out the front door, discussing commission rates and closing costs, I held Richard's letter, tucked safely in my pocket, and felt the sharp edges of the key to the cottage in Rosewood. Their storm was coming, but I was already standing in the eye of it, perfectly, terrifyingly calm. Part 2, The Siege Within My Walls. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare, with me as the occupied territory. My home, my sanctuary, became a stage for a play I hadn't auditioned for. Brenda, the real estate agent, planted a "for sale" sign on my front lawn without a word to me. It stood there like a tombstone for my life, a garish red and white declaration of my impending eviction. Seeing it from my kitchen window for the first time felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Richard and I had planted the rose bushes that flanked that sign. He'd meticulously tended to that lawn for 40 years. Now, it was just a plot of land to be traded. David and Linda's campaign of helping escalated into a full-blown siege. They insisted on managing my finances, claiming I was in no state to deal with bills. David sat at my desk, in Richard's chair, rifling through papers that represented the intimate machinery of my life. He'd hold up a utility bill with a sigh. "See, Mom? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're paying way too much for heating. The new apartment will have all of this included. So much simpler for you." He opened a joint savings account with me, just to make it easier to pay your bills from our end. He coaxed me into it, guiding my hand as I signed the paperwork, his voice a low, reassuring murmur about efficiency and security. I knew what he was doing. He was creating a pipeline. He was ensuring that when the house sold, the money would flow into an account he could control. I let him. I signed the forms, my hands steady, my face a mask of weary compliance. Every patronizing pat on my shoulder, every time Linda referred to me in the third person while I was standing right there, I filed it away. It was fuel. The showings were the worst part. Brenda would call with less than an hour's notice. "We have an interested party, Evelyn. Please make sure the house is tidy. And it would be best if you weren't there. Buyers like to imagine themselves in the space. Be best if I weren't there." I was being told to vacate my own life so strangers could critique it. I would retreat to the small public library downtown, sitting for hours among the quiet stacks, the smell of old books a temporary balm. But I couldn't escape the feeling of violation. The thought of strangers opening my closets, judging the faint scuff marks on the walls where David's tricycle had hit 40 years ago, peering into the private corners of my existence, it felt obscene. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. A sleek, black luxury car was in my driveway, and I could hear voices from inside. I let myself in through the back door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Brenda was in the living room with a young couple, dripping with new money and entitlement. "The bones are fantastic," the woman was saying, running a manicured finger over my mantelpiece. "We've got the kitchen, of course. Open this all up. And this wallpaper," she grimaced. "It's so dated." She was talking about the wallpaper Richard and I had spent 2 weekends putting up ourselves, arguing and laughing the entire time. I can still remember the feel of his hand on my back, steadying me on the ladder. I must have made a sound, because they all turned. Brenda's plastic smile tightened. "Evelyn. I thought we'd agreed you'd be out until 5. David, who had apparently joined them, rushed over. "Mom, what are you doing here? You're making the buyers uncomfortable." I looked at the young couple, who were now staring at me as if I were a piece of that dated wallpaper they were so eager to tear down. I felt a hot flash of anger, so intense it almost made me dizzy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them all to get out of my house, out of my life. Instead, I drew on a lifetime of quiet dignity. I pulled my shoulders back and looked David directly in the eye. "I live here," I said, my voice low but clear. I was just getting a glass of water. I walked into the kitchen, my movements deliberate and slow. I could feel their eyes on my back. I ran the tap, filled a glass, and drank it down, my throat tight with unshed tears and unspoken fury. The silence in the other room was thick with tension. The spell was broken. The potential buyers left a few minutes later, their murmurs suddenly hushed and awkward. That evening, David was furious. Not at the entitled couple or the intrusive agent, but at me. "You embarrassed me, Mom. You were deliberately difficult. Brenda said you soured the whole showing." That couple was very interested. "This is still my house, David," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "And that's the problem," he shot back, his mask of concern finally slipping to reveal the raw greed beneath. "You're being selfish. You're sitting on a goldmine while Linda and I are struggling. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? We've put an offer on a new house, a bigger place. It's a great opportunity, a wonderful school district for the kids we plan to have. We were counting on this. We need this to happen." There it was. The truth, ugly and undeniable. It had nothing to do with my well-being, my safety, or my happiness. It was about his ambition. His upgrade. My home, my life, was simply collateral for his. The conversation crushed something in me, but it also crystallized my resolve. Any lingering guilt, any flicker of doubt about the path I was considering, vanished. He was not the boy I had raised. He was a stranger, and he was my adversary. The next day, feigning a headache, I stayed in my room while Brenda held an open house. But I wasn't resting. I was listening. The walls in that old house were thin, and David and Linda, believing me to be upstairs and out of earshot, spoke freely in the kitchen. "Did you talk to Mark about the paperwork?" Linda asked, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Yeah," David replied. "He said as long as I have power of attorney, which I do, for her finances, and she's deemed, mentally frail, we can push the sale through without her final signature on everything. We can sign on her behalf to accept the offer. It's a gray area, but he said it's doable. Especially since she's so confused all the time." "And the money? It goes straight into that new joint account?" "Every penny. The closing check will be made out to both of us. By the time she even realizes what's happening, it'll be done. We'll have the down payment for the new place, and she'll be safe and sound in that nice little apartment." A wave of cold washed over me, so intense I had to sit on the edge of the bed. Forgery. Deception. They were actively conspiring to defraud me, using my perceived weakness as their primary tool. Mentally frail. The words echoed in my head. They had already written me off, not just as a homeowner, but as a person. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. A strange, chilling calm settled over me. They thought they were holding all the cards. They thought they were in control. But they had no idea about the secret hand I'd been dealt. They had no idea about Richard's foresight, about the cottage in Rosewood, about the bank account they couldn't touch. The final straw came a week later. David arrived, waving a piece of paper triumphantly. "Good news, Mom. We got a fantastic offer. Way over asking price. It's all happening. The closing date is in 3 weeks. I told them we could be out by the end of the month." He looked so proud of himself, so pleased with his own cleverness. He saw the blank look on my face and took it for shock, or maybe senile acceptance. "I know it's fast," he said, softening his voice back to its familiar, patronizing tone. "But it's for the best. A clean break. Don't you worry, I've already booked the movers. They'll be here on the 31st, bright and early. We'll get you all sorted." 3 weeks. The clock was officially ticking. He thought he was giving me a deadline. In reality, he was giving me a head start. He left that day feeling like a conquering hero, a dutiful son who had successfully managed a difficult situation. He left me standing in the hallway of the house he had just sold out from under me. And as I watched his car pull away, a slow, determined smile touched my lips for the first time in months. The siege was about to be broken. But I wouldn't be rescued. I would be my own liberator. Part 3, The Blueprint for Liberation. The declaration of a closing date didn't trigger panic. It triggered a quiet, methodical fury that was more potent than any raging tantrum. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a clarity of purpose that cut through the fog of grief like a beacon. David had handed me a timeline. Now, I would build my own. My kitchen table, the site of my disenfranchisement, became my war room. Richard's letter was my constitution, the deed my declaration of independence. My first move was reconnaissance. I needed to see it, to touch it, to know that the cottage in Rosewood was real and not just a beautiful dream on a piece of paper. David and Linda were consumed with their own house purchase, endlessly discussing mortgage rates and kitchen renovations, so it was easy to slip away. I told them I was meeting an old friend from my book club for lunch, a woman who had moved to a town an hour away. The lie came easily, a smooth, polished stone in my mouth. The drive to Rosewood was a revelation. With every mile I put between myself and my occupied home, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. The city's suburbs gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. When I finally turned onto the small, tree-lined street named Willow Creek Lane, my heart was pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. And then I saw it. It was exactly as I remembered from our Sunday drives years ago. A small white cottage, nestled behind a sprawling oak tree, with a stone chimney and sky-blue shutters. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. It looked peaceful. I parked the car, and for a long moment, I just sat there, looking at it. This was my future. This was Richard's last gift. The key, which I had kept in my coin purse for weeks, felt warm in my hand. It slid into the lock and turned with a satisfying click. The door swung open, and I was hit with the faint, pleasant smell of dry wood, lavender, and clean, still air. The previous owners, or perhaps Richard himself, had left it impeccably clean. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fairies. It was sparsely furnished, a simple bed, a sturdy dining table, a comfortable-looking armchair by the fireplace. It was a blank canvas. It was a promise. I walked through every room, running my hand along the cool plaster walls. I opened a window and listened. All I could hear was the rustle of leaves and the distant gurgle of a creek. There were no condescending voices, no real estate agents, no whispers of my own obsolescence. There was only peace. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. This wasn't just a house, it was an escape hatch from a life that was closing in on me. The next day, I made my second move. I took a bus to Rosewood, not wanting my car to be seen there twice. I walked into the Rosewood Community Bank, a charming old brick building on the town square. It felt like stepping back in time. There were no glass partitions, just friendly tellers and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I was shown into the office of the bank manager, a kind-faced man named Mr. Abernathy. I presented the bank statement and my identification. He looked them over, a gentle smile forming on his face. "Ah, yes. Mrs. Thompson. Richard, your husband, spoke very highly of you. He set this all up a few years back. Said it was his peace of mind fund." The professionalism and respect with which he treated me was a stark contrast to the way my own son did. Mr. Abernathy didn't see a confused old woman, he saw a client. He answered all my questions, confirmed the balance, and provided me with a new debit card and checkbook. The act of signing my name alone, on the signature card felt like a revolutionary act. I walked out of that bank feeling 10 feet tall. I now had the resources. The final, most critical piece of the puzzle fell into my lap by pure chance. A week before the move, a letter arrived, mistakenly delivered to my mailbox. It was addressed to David, but to his and Linda's current address, a few towns over. The postman had obviously been confused. I almost called David to tell him, but some instinct, some whisper of suspicion, made me pause. I held the envelope up to the light. It was from a law firm specializing in real estate. My hands trembled as I carefully steamed it open over the kettle, feeling like a spy in my own home. My heart pounded as I read the contents. It was a letter confirming the closing date for the sale of their current house. It was scheduled for the 30th of the month, the day before they were supposed to move me. The letter also referenced a sizable bridge loan they had taken out to secure the purchase of their new, much larger home, a loan that was contingent on, and would be repaid by, the proceeds from the sale of my house. I sat down, the letter shaking in my hand. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. They had leveraged my home, my life, to fund their own. They had sold their own house and were banking everything on taking mine, leaving themselves homeless for a day, confident they would be moving into their new mansion the moment the money from my house cleared. They had built a financial house of cards, and the foundation, the very bottom card, was me. And they were about to find out that foundation was made of sand. This knowledge changed everything. It elevated my plan from a simple escape to a perfectly executed act of karmic justice. My final note to him, which I had already been composing in my head, now had its devastating centerpiece. The last week was a whirlwind of clandestine activity. I operated in the spaces they didn't see, in the hours they weren't there. I became a master of deception, wearing my mask of frail compliance like a second skin. When Linda came by with boxes, chirping about how we could make packing fun, I would smile weakly and let her pack up the kitchen, putting things I cared nothing about into neatly labeled containers. But at night, after they were gone, my real work began. I went through 42 years of memories, not with sadness, but with surgical precision. I was not curating a life, I was packing a survival kit for a new one. I chose what mattered. Richard's worn copy of Moby Dick. The box of photos from our trip to the coast. My mother's china, which had survived a world war and would now survive my son. I wrapped each piece in old sweaters and towels, packing them into 2 large, sturdy suitcases I'd found in the attic. I hired a small, independent moving service, a man with an unmarked van I found in the classifieds and paid for in cash. I scheduled him to arrive at 5 a.m. on the 31st. The same day David's large, branded moving company was scheduled to arrive at 9. The day before the move, David came for a final walkthrough. He was practically vibrating with excitement and self-congratulation. "Look at this, Mom. Almost all packed up. See? We did it. Painless, right?" he said, gesturing at the stacks of boxes Linda had packed. I looked at him, my son, a man so blinded by his own ambition he couldn't see the truth right in front of him. He saw a room full of boxes. He didn't see that all the boxes contained things I was leaving behind. The good silverware we never used. Old financial records. Linens I didn't care for. My most precious things were already hidden away, waiting for their pre-dawn escape. "You've been a great help, dear," I said, and my voice was perfectly steady. That night, the house was eerily quiet. It felt empty already. I made myself a final cup of tea in my favorite mug and sat by the window, looking out at the "for sale" sign on my lawn. It was a surreal feeling, sitting in the epicenter of a life that was about to be detonated. I thought about calling him. One last chance to appeal to the little boy I used to know. But I knew that boy was long gone. The man he had become deserved what was coming. He had mistaken my silence for surrender. He was about to learn that it was the quiet before the storm. I took a pen and a piece of my best stationery, the cream-colored set Richard had given me one anniversary. My hand did not shake as I wrote the 5 simple lines that would bring his house of cards crashing down. I folded the note, placed it on the bare kitchen counter where it couldn't be missed, and went to bed. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. Part 4, The Dawn of a New Life. The alarm I'd set went off at 4:30 a.m., but I was already awake. I had been lying in the dark, not with anxiety, but with a profound and thrilling sense of anticipation. This was it. The culmination of weeks of secret planning, of biting my tongue, of allowing myself to be underestimated one last time. The moving van arrived at precisely 5 a.m., just as promised. It was a simple, unmarked white van, and the driver, a quiet, burly man named Gus, moved with a discreet efficiency that was worth every penny of the cash I'd paid him. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. He knew his job was not just to move possessions, but to facilitate an escape. Together, we carried out the things that truly mattered. My 2 large suitcases, a few boxes filled with photo albums and Richard's favorite books, my mother's china carefully wrapped and secured, and a small rosewood box containing the letters Richard and I had written to each other during our courtship. As Gus loaded the last box into the van, I took one final walk through the house. The rooms looked strange and hollow, filled with the ghosts of laughter and life. The stacks of boxes David and Linda had so diligently packed stood like monuments to their own folly. They contained the shell of a life, not its soul. That was coming with me. On the kitchen counter, my note sat in a stark white envelope, looking small and insignificant, but I knew it held the power of a bomb. I locked the front door behind me, the click of the tumbler sounding unnaturally loud in the pre-dawn stillness. I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. The house was just a structure, the home was something I would build again elsewhere. I followed Gus's van in my own car, driving through the sleeping suburbs as the sky began to bleed from inky black to a soft, pearly gray. By the time we reached the outskirts of Rosewood, the sun was breaking over the horizon, painting the world in hues of orange and pink. It felt like the first day of the rest of my life. Unpacking at the cottage was the antithesis of the frantic, stressful ordeal David had planned for me. It was a calm, deliberate ritual of reclamation. Gus helped me carry everything inside, and with a respectful nod, he was gone. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I was not lonely. I made the bed with my own familiar linens. I placed Richard's copy of Moby Dick on the nightstand. And then, I carefully unwrapped each piece of my mother's china, my hands steady, my heart full. I set the table for one, not with a sense of loss, but with a sense of serene independence. I brewed a pot of fresh coffee, the rich aroma filling my small, new home. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one that looked out onto the sprawling oak tree, and took a sip. The coffee was hot and strong. The silence was absolute. And in that silence, I allowed myself to imagine the scene unfolding 50 miles away. I pictured David and Linda arriving around 9, their faces beaming with smug satisfaction. The big, official moving truck would be right behind them, the crew ready to dismantle a life. I saw David striding up to the front door, key in hand, ready to take possession. His triumphant smile would falter first, turning to confusion as he saw the house was empty. Not just of furniture, but of me. He would call my name. Mom? We're here. His voice would echo in the hollow rooms. Panic would begin to prickle at the edges of his confidence. Linda would be right behind him, her perfectly made-up face contorting into a mask of irritation. Where is she? Did she wander off? And then, one of them would see it. The single white envelope on the kitchen counter. I imagined David snatching it up, tearing it open with impatient fingers. I could almost see his eyes scanning the words, his brain struggling to comprehend the message. David. I know you sold your house. Fortunately, I still have mine. Love, Mom. The silence that would follow. The slow, dawning horror in his eyes as the implications crashed down upon him. He would read it again, and then a third time. Linda would be demanding to know what it said. He would hand it to her, his own hand starting to shake. Their world would unravel in a matter of minutes. The frantic calls to my cell phone would go straight to voicemail. I had turned it off the moment I left, and had no intention of ever turning it on again. He would call the real estate agent, Brenda, his voice escalating from confusion to rage. She would confirm the sale of my house was set to close that afternoon. But then the lawyers would get involved. A sale is not final until the papers are signed at closing. And the primary owner, Evelyn Marie Thompson, was nowhere to be found. In fact, she had no intention of selling. The real bombshell would drop when David, in his desperation, called his own lawyer, who would eventually discover the truth. The house he had sold wasn't legally his to sell. Power of attorney over finances did not grant him the right to liquidate my primary asset against my will without my explicit, final consent. The sale would collapse. The buyers would sue. Brenda's commission would vanish into thin air, likely replaced by a lawsuit of her own, but the worst part, the part that made my quiet revenge so exquisitely complete, was the cascading effect. The sale of their own house had closed yesterday. They no longer owned their home. The massive bridge loan they had taken out for their new mansion was due. And the money they had counted on, the money from my house which was the linchpin of their entire financial gamble, did not exist. They were, in effect, homeless. Trapped between a house they no longer owned and a house they could no longer afford. Their greed had built them a prison, and they had just walked into it and locked the door behind them. The chaos, the screaming matches, the recriminations between him and Linda, I could picture it all with perfect, cinematic clarity. The man who had tried to render me powerless was now the most powerless man in the world. And it was all because he had looked at his own mother and seen not a person, but a profit margin. I took another sip of coffee. I did not feel a spike of vindictive joy. I did not feel hatred. I felt calm. A deep, quiet, and profound sense of justice. It was the feeling of a world that had been tilted on its axis being gently but firmly set right again. I spent the rest of the day unpacking, creating my new nest. I found a spot for every photograph, a shelf for every book. As evening fell, I sat on my small front porch and listened to the crickets begin their nightly chorus. My phone remained off. My past was silenced. Far away, my son was likely in the throes of a self-inflicted financial and personal ruin. Here, in the quiet sanctuary Richard had given me, I was simply content. He had tried to steal my home, and in doing so, had lost his own. He had tried to rob me of my future, only to find he had gambled away his own. He thought my silence was weakness, my age an opportunity. He never understood. Sometimes, silence isn't an absence of power. It's the sound of a plan coming together. It's the sharpest revenge of all. In the months that followed, Rosewood became my home. I joined the local gardening club, I made friends at the library, I learned the name of the baker and the postman. I adopted a stray cat who I named Richard, a grumpy but affectionate old tomcat who liked to sleep in the sunbeams on my living room floor. My life became small, and quiet, and entirely my own. It was more wonderful than I could have possibly imagined. I never heard from David or Linda again. I didn't need to. I knew that the consequences of their actions would have been a tidal wave, wiping out the carefully curated, upwardly mobile life they had been so desperate to build. Their greed was a boomerang, and I had simply stepped out of the way and let it fly back to them. My revenge was not loud. There was no confrontation, no shouting match, no dramatic courtroom scene. My revenge was a quiet click of a door locking behind me, the turning of a key in a new lock, and the deafening silence that followed. It was the act of reclaiming my own story, of picking up the pen that Richard had left me and writing a new, final chapter, for myself. And it was the most satisfying thing I have ever done. They say that living well is the best revenge. But sometimes, ensuring those who wronged you can no longer live well at your expense is the first, most necessary step. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to fight to reclaim your own narrative, to stand up to someone who underestimated you, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, served just right.